You are the first male we have encountered from another species. By tradition, you will now fight me for the right to breed our empress and noblewomen as our prized bull." The towering female alien's words hung in the air of the meeting room aboard the human ship, where a small expeditionary force led by Isaac Warren had just made tense first contact with the Yaderans, a fierce warrior race. Isaac stared in disbelief at the delegation leader Kayla, an imposing 7-foot specimen of rippling muscle and piercing yellow eyes. He struggled to process her shocking declaration. Kayla pointed a clawed finger at Isaac, singling him out among the human delegation. "You human male, I challenge you to single combat, hand to hand, to prove your worth as breeding stock. If you refuse my challenge or lose the fight, it will be taken as a grave insult. The Yadaran Empire will have no choice but to declare war on your species. But if you win, you will be taken to our homeworld and given the great honor of fathering the offspring of our empress and the noblest of Yadaran females. An alliance will be secured between our peoples." Isaac's mind reeled as he looked to his commanding officer for guidance. The stakes couldn't be higher. Humanity's first contact with an alien civilization would either end in devastating war or with him being hauled off to be breeding chattel for a harem of deadly alien warriors. His commander pulled him aside, whispering urgently, "Isaac, you can't win this fight. She'll rip you apart. Better to throw the match than be enslaved on their world as some damn stud bull." But as he looked into his commander's eyes, then back at the Yadaran delegation, Isaac knew he had no real choice. If he backed down, humanity would pay the price in blood. The Yadarans were a brutal warrior race forged on a hellish planet of harsh extremes, sweltering deserts, jagged mountains, skies torn by violent electrical storms. A cruel world that had birthed a cruel people, structured into constantly warring matriarchal clans who viewed all other species as inferior. If it came to war, Isaac had no doubt the humans would lose, and that defeat would be on him. The weight settled like a stone in his gut as he stepped forward to face Kellar. "I accept your challenge," he declared, meeting her yellow gaze head-on. Her slow, predatory smile spread across the alien female's face, revealing wickedly sharp teeth. "Good. Then let us begin, human." They began to circle each other slowly in the open space of the meeting area. Tension crackled in the air between them. Isaac's eyes flicked over Kellar's form, all coiled power and sinuous grace, belying the sheer physical strength he knew lurked beneath. He was outmatched in every way by her alien physiology, optimized for combat. He swallowed hard, heartbeat pounding in his ears as he raised his fists, knowing the odds were utterly stacked against him. The fate of his entire species hung in the balance as the fight began. Kellar and Isaac circled each other in the combat ring, their movements predatory and calculated. The anticipation was thick enough in the air to make breathing difficult as human and Yadaran onlookers waited to see who would emerge victorious. Isaac called on every bit of his training as his eyes tracked Kellar's powerful frame. Her green scales shimmered under the ship's lights, muscles coiled and ready to strike. Cold intelligence flashed in her eyes as she assessed her human challenger. Isaac ducked and wove as Kellar pressed her attack, fists and talons flying between them. A claw caught his shoulder, drawing blood. He scored a solid kick to her knee that barely made her flinch. Every block and counter took more effort as the battle dragged on. Kellar's endurance was monstrous, her strength unrelenting. Isaac's body burned with fatigue, breath coming hard as he struggled to keep up his defense. "Come on, Isaac! Don't let that alien bitch take you down," one of the human crew yelled from the sidelines. The shouts faded to a distant buzz as Isaac's focus narrowed to surviving the next strike, the next second. He knew a single mistake would be the end, for him and possibly for humanity, if this first contact turned to war. Kaylar's fist hammered into his guard, the impact sending shocks up his arms. Isaac's block faltered. Her eyes flashed in triumph as she lunged in to end it. Time slowed. Isaac saw his one chance, a tiny gap at the hinge of her armored neck. Wrenching his body around with the last of his strength, Isaac drove his fist into that weak point with everything he had left. Shock painted Kellar's face as she staggered back. The crowd held its breath. She sank to one knee and bowed her head to Isaac. Murmurs rippled through the Yadarans. "Well fought, human," Keller acknowledged as she stood. "You have proven your worth as a mate for our Empress. Few males of any species have lasted so long against me in the combat ring." Isaac barely heard her words, head spinning with exhaustion and the gravity of what his victory meant. An alliance won, at the cost of his freedom. Yadaran guards flanked him as he stumbled out of the ring towards their shuttle. He looked back at his human crew one last time, hoping he'd made the right choice for them. In the shuttle, speeding towards a wormhole in the Yadaran homeworld, Isaac slumped in his seat across from Keela. Her eyes raked over him, respect and possession warring in her gaze. "You will do well on Yadara, human," she said. "Our females will prize your strength and spirit, and your offspring will be mighty indeed." Isaac clenched his fists as the wormhole swallowed the ship, carrying him towards a fate he'd never imagined. He would face the trials ahead with all the strength and wit he could muster, not just for his own soul, but for the future of humanity. This strange path, fraught with danger and uncertainty as it was, would be the crucible in which that future was forged. Isaac's eyes widened as the shuttle burst through the wormhole. Yadara loomed before him, a behemoth world wreathed in swirling storm clouds. Rugged mountains stretched across vast continents, dotted with imposing fortresses that dwarfed any human structure he'd ever seen. "Behold, human, your new home," Keller said, her voice tinged with pride. The shuttle plunged through the turbulent atmosphere. Isaac pressed his face to the viewport, taking in the alien landscape below. They soared over a sprawling metropolis, its architecture a blend of brutal functionality and sleek advanced tech. In a massive coliseum, warriors clashed in savage combat. Crowds roared as blood spilled on the arena floor. Towering statues of fierce female conquerors loomed over city squares. In the streets, Isaac glimpsed hulking creatures with too many limbs lumbering between buildings. "Bioengineered war mounts," Keller replied. "You'll become familiar with them soon enough." The shuttle touched down atop a towering spire, the royal palace. As the hatch opened, Isaac was hit by a wave of thick, humid air. The stench of ozone filled his nostrils as lightning crackled in the distance. A squad of heavily armored guards surrounded them, energy spears crackling with destructive power. Kayla gripped Isaac's arm, her claws digging into his skin. "Come, human, time to meet your new mistresses." Isaac stumbled as she yanked him forward, struggling to match her long strides. The guards fell in around them as they entered the palace proper. Inside was a maze of twisting obsidian corridors. Eerie blue light pulsed from strange orbs set in the walls. Vivid murals depicted scenes of brutal conquest, Yadaran warriors crushing alien foes beneath their boots. Isaac's footsteps echoed as Kalar dragged him onward. His mind raced, trying to process the alien sights and sounds assaulting his senses. They emerged into a cavernous throne room. At the far end, atop a dais of jagged black stone, sat the most terrifying female Isaac had ever seen. The Yadaran Empress rose to her full height, easily 9 feet tall. Rippling muscles moved beneath iridescent green scales. Her eyes bored into Isaac, cold and calculating. "So this is the human male who bested you, Keller? He doesn't look like much." Kellar bowed low. "Appearances deceive, my Empress. His spirit burns bright. He will make a worthy addition to your breeding stable." The Empress descended from her throne, circling Isaac slowly. He felt like a prize animal at auction as she inspected every inch of him. The other alien females watched hungrily from the sidelines. "We shall see," the Empress purred. "Take him to the breeding chambers. Let us test his mettle." Kellar's iron grip closed on Isaac's arm once more. As she hauled him towards a dark doorway, his heart pounded. What trials awaited him in the depths of this alien palace? But beneath the fear, a thrill of excitement coursed through him. This was the ultimate test of his strength and virility. He would face whatever challenges lay ahead and prove the true worth of humanity. The breeding chambers loomed before him. Isaac squared his shoulders and strode forward to meet his fate. Isaac's back hit the furs as the Empress pinned him down. Her strength was overwhelming, muscles rippling beneath iridescent scales. She loomed over him, eyes blazing with primal hunger. "Do not disappoint me, human," she growled. Isaac steeled himself, pushing aside fear and revulsion. He had to endure this for humanity's sake. As the Empress's talons raked down his chest, he gritted his teeth and pulled her closer. Their bodies clashed in a frenzy of alien lust. Isaac poured every ounce of passion and virility into satisfying the insatiable Empress. Sweat mingled with the steam rising from nearby pools. The fleshy vines above pulsed in rhythm with their frantic coupling. Time lost all meaning in that dim cavern. Isaac's world narrowed to the Empress's fierce embrace, her demanding caresses, her cries of pleasure echoing off stone walls. His muscles burned with exertion as he strove to match her inhuman stamina. The watching noblewomen circled restlessly, eyes gleaming in the shadows. Low growls of frustration and arousal rumbled from their throats. Isaac caught glimpses of taloned fingers twitching, scales flushing with heat. Their hunger was a palpable force pressing in on him. Hours passed in a blur of carnal frenzy. Just when Isaac thought he could take no more, the Empress arched her back and roared in triumph. The sound reverberated through Isaac's bones. She collapsed atop him, chest heaving. "Well done, my pet," she purred, running a claw along his jaw. "You may yet prove worthy of your role here." Isaac's body sank into the plush furs beneath him, every muscle screaming in protest. The Empress's powerful form pressed him down, her scaled skin slick with sweat and other fluids. Her razor-sharp talons raked down his back, leaving burning trails in their wake. Isaac bucked against her, caught between pain and a primal surge of pleasure. "Is this all humans can offer?" the Empress growled, her voice a low rumble that vibrated through Isaac's chest. Her hips ground against his relentlessly, her inner muscles clenching around him with inhuman strength. Isaac gritted his teeth, struggling to match her pace. His hands gripped her thighs, feeling the corded alien muscle beneath. Hours passed in a blur of sensation, the scrape of scales, the wet heat of her core, the thundering of his own pulse in his ears. When release finally came, Isaac's vision went white. He cried out, body arching off the furs, but the Empress only laughed, a dark sound that sent chills down his spine. "Pathetic," she sneered, claws raking across his heaving chest. "You'll need far more stamina to be worthy of me, little human." Before Isaac could catch his breath, she lunged forward. Her teeth sank into his shoulder, breaking the skin. The sharp pain jolted through him, mingling with the lingering aftershocks of pleasure. To his shock, he felt himself hardening again within her. "Yes," the Empress hissed, rolling her hips. "Show me what truly impressed Kalar. Prove your worth as a breeder." And so it continued, an endless cycle of coupling and brief, fitful rest. Isaac lost all sense of time, aware only of the Empress's insatiable hunger and his own body's struggle to keep up. Each time he thought he had nothing left to give, she would draw more from him through pleasure or pain. At times, other Yaderan females joined them. Isaac found himself passed between them, drowning in a sea of alien flesh. Scaled bodies writhed against him. Taloned hands explored every inch of his skin. He tasted their alien musk, felt the wet heat of their cores engulfing him. Only when twin suns peeked through high windows did the frenzy finally cease. Isaac lay limp, surrounded by the sprawled forms of satiated Yaderan nobles. His body ached, covered in bruises, bites, and claw marks. The Empress loomed over him, her golden eyes gleaming with satisfaction. Her long tongue flicked out, tasting the mingled fluids on his skin. "You've surpassed my expectations, human," she purred. "I can feel your seed taking root within me." She nuzzled the ragged bite on his shoulder, sending fresh sparks of pain through him. "Rest now. When you wake, you'll breed every female of my clan until they all carry your young." Isaac shuddered, equal parts dread and anticipation coursing through him. As consciousness faded, he felt the Yaderan women curling around him possessively, their hands and tongues still exploring his exhausted form. His last conscious thought was a realization. He belonged to them now, a prized breeding stud for their alien race, and deep in his core, past the fear and uncertainty, a part of him thrilled at the prospect. A feral grin spread across his face as he surrendered to oblivion, awaiting the next round of endless, brutal coupling. Isaac's eyelids fluttered open, his vision swimming as consciousness slowly returned. Every fiber of his being ached, muscles protesting even the slightest movement. He tried to sit up, but found himself pinned beneath the weight of several Yadaran bodies. The indigo-scaled female kneading his legs dug her talons in deeper, eliciting a hiss of pain from Isaac. Her forked tongue flicked out, lapping at the mixture of fluids coating his inner thighs. The sensation sent involuntary shivers through his battered frame. The noblewoman straddling his chest leaned forward, her pendulous breast swaying. Thick droplets of golden nectar fell from her nipples, splattering onto Isaac's parched lips. The sweet, viscous liquid slid down his throat, igniting a fire in his core. "Drink deep, human," she commanded. "You'll need your strength replenished." Isaac's body betrayed him, gulping down the restorative substance greedily. With each swallow, he felt a surge of vitality coursing through his veins. His fatigue began to ebb, replaced by a primal energy that both thrilled and terrified him. The Empress's talons scraped across his scalp, sending tingles down his spine. Her amber eyes bored into him, filled with predatory hunger. "The time approaches, my prize," she growled. "Zarath will soon crest the horizon. Are you prepared to fulfill your duty?" Isaac's throat constricted, raw from hours of use. He managed to croak out a reply, his voice barely above a whisper. "I told you. I won't break. This is my body. My will." The Empress's maw split in a terrifying grin, rows of razor-sharp teeth glinting in the fading light. "Such spirit," she mocked. "We shall see how long it lasts when my entire clan descends upon you." As if on cue, the chamber filled with the rustling of scales on stone. Dozens of Yadaran noblewomen crowded around the raised dais where Isaac lay. Their eyes gleamed with barely restrained lust, forked tongues flicking out to taste the pheromone-laden air. One of the aliens, her scales a deep emerald, leaned in close. Her hot breath washed over Isaac's face as she spoke. "I can smell your fear, human, but I also scent your arousal. Your body betrays you, even as your mind resists." Isaac sharpened his eyes, fighting against the maelstrom of sensations threatening to overwhelm him. The warmth of alien flesh pressed against him from all sides. The heady musk of Yadaran females in heat filled his nostrils. His own traitorous body responded, hardening despite his exhaustion. Through the haze of conflicting emotions, Isaac clung to that last ember of defiance burning in his chest. He may be their captive, their prize, but he refused to let them strip away his humanity entirely. As the twin moons of Yadera began to rise, painting the breeding chamber in an eerie, ethereal glow, Isaac steeled himself for the ordeal to come. He would endure. He would survive. And somehow, someway, he would find a path to freedom, for himself and for the future of humanity. The crimson light of Yadera's twin suns faded, casting long shadows across the breeding chamber. Isaac's muscles screamed in protest as he pushed himself up onto trembling arms. His skin glistened with sweat, marred by a tapestry of scratches and bruises from the Empress's brutal claiming. Kalar's talons clicked against the stone floor as she emerged from the antechamber. Her yellow eyes locked onto Isaac, narrowing with predatory intensity. "The ritual will now recommence, human. Prepare yourself." A shudder ran through Isaac's battered frame, but he forced himself to his feet. His fists clenched at his sides, teeth clenched in defiance. Though every movement sent jolts of pain through his body, that spark of resistance still burned within him. The Empress strode into the chamber, her scales gleaming in the fading light. A low chuckle rumbled from her throat as she approached Isaac, trailing a razor-sharp talon along his jaw. "I can see that defiant fire still burns within you, my virile pet," she purred. Her hot breath washed over his face, rich with alien pheromones. "Good. That pride, that insolent arrogance, It will make breaking you all the sweeter when your pathetic human will finally shatters beneath our onslaught. Isaac met her gaze unflinchingly, refusing to give her the satisfaction of a response. The Empress's lips curled into a cruel smile as she turned away, ascending the dais at the chamber's center. "Let the breeding rituals begin anew," she declared, her voice ringing out. "Bring forth the first of my fertile young broodmothers to receive this human seed." From the shadowed alcoves, a procession of alien noblewomen emerged. At their head strode a striking female, her scales a shimmering tapestry of violet and indigo. Despite her towering height and muscular frame, there was an almost delicate quality to her features. "Behold Irala, my firstborn and heir," the Empress announced. "Let her be the first of this new brood to receive your potent human essence, my prize." Irala approached Isaac with predatory grace, her full lips quirked in a hungry smile. As she drew close, the scent of her arousal hit him like a physical force. Her hands closed around his biceps, claws digging into his flesh as she pulled him against her. "Don't fight this, human," she breathed, her forked tongue flicking out to trace his jaw. "The sooner you accept your role in bringing forth our clan's new generation, the sooner your suffering will end." With startling speed and strength, Irala spun Isaac around and pinned him face down on the pillowed dais. He grunted as her weight settled over his lower back, feeling the ripple of alien muscle beneath her scaled hide. All around, the other noblewomen watched with rapt attention. Their sinuous bodies undulated in anticipation, eyes gleaming with barely restrained lust. "Take your prize, daughter," the Empress commanded, her voice thick with eagerness. "Let this human seed take deep root within your womb and bear me a new generation of mighty warriors." Irala's body arched as she positioned herself over Isaac. He gritted his teeth, bracing for what was to come. With a sensual groan, she enveloped him in her blazing depths. The unnaturally tight sheath of her body closed around him like a velvet vice, scorching heat engulfing him. Then she began to move. Her powerful haunches pistoned against him in a punishing rhythm. Isaac's fists clenched in the soft pallet beneath him as Irala's talons raked furrows across his shoulders, using them for leverage. Wave after wave of merciless, primitive coupling crashed over Isaac. Each impact of Irala's alien body jolted him, leaving him breathless and reeling. Sweat poured down his face as he gritted his teeth against the onslaught of sensation. Time lost all meaning. Isaac's world narrowed to the blazing friction, the bestial snarls and moans echoing in his ears, the rich musk of alien lust clogging his senses. On and on it went, pushing him to the very limits of human endurance. When release finally came, it tore through him like a supernova. Irala's triumphant cry rang out as she collapsed atop him, her body shuddering in the throes of ecstasy. "Well and truly seeded, human," she murmured against his neck, her voice thick with satisfaction. "Your young quickens within me even now, merged with the blood of our noble clan. Be proud, for you have just sired the Empress's heir." Across the chamber, the Empress let out a rumbling chuckle of dark pleasure. But there was no time for Isaac to recover. Already, more noblewomen stepped forward, their eyes burning with rapacious hunger. Isaac looked up in desperation, seeing their alien forms advancing. A cold dread settled in his gut as he realized his ordeal had only just begun. Isaac's world exploded into white-hot agony as Kilana's talons raked across his chest, leaving fiery trails in their wake. Her jade scales scraped against his raw skin as she positioned herself over him, her alien heat blazing against his most sensitive areas. "Look at me," she snarled, seizing his jaw and forcing his gaze to meet hers. Her emerald eyes burned with predatory hunger, pupils dilated to dark slits. With a savage thrust, she impaled herself on him. Isaac's back arched involuntarily, a strangled cry torn from his ravaged throat. Kilana's inner muscles clenched around him with crushing force, rippling and undulating in ways no human woman could match. She set a brutal pace, each downward slam of her hips driving the air from Isaac's lungs. Her talons dug into his shoulders, breaking the skin and drawing fresh rivulets of blood. The knife in her other hand, never wavered from its position at his throat, its keen edge a constant threat with every movement. "That's it, human," Kalana hissed, her forked tongue flicking out to taste the salt of his sweat and the copper tang of his blood. "Fight me. Struggle. It only makes this sweeter." All around them, the chamber echoed with the hungry growls and hisses of the watching noblewomen. Their scaled bodies writhed in vicarious pleasure, eyes gleaming with barely restrained lust as they watched Kalana stake her claim. Isaac gritted his teeth, fighting against the maelstrom of sensation threatening to overwhelm him. Pain and pleasure blurred together, each thrust of Kalana's powerful body sending jolts of electricity up his spine. He could feel his willpower crumbling, his body betraying him yet again as it responded to the alien stimulation. Kalana leaned in close, her hot breath washing over his face as she spoke. "I can feel you weakening, whelp. Your body knows its place, even if your mind resists. Submit. Give me your seed." Her rhythm grew more frantic, more desperate. Isaac could see the naked need in her eyes, the all-consuming drive to be bred, his own release built against his will, a tide of sensation he couldn't hope to hold back. With a final punishing thrust, Kalana threw her head back and let out a ululating cry of triumph. Her inner muscles clamped down on Isaac like a vice, milking him for every last drop, as his own climax tore through him with shattering force. For endless moments they remained locked together, shuddering in the throes of shared ecstasy. Then Kalana slumped forward, her breathing ragged as she nuzzled against Isaac's throat. "Well seeded," she purred, a note of satisfaction in her voice. "You've done well, human. Perhaps you'll survive long enough to see our offspring hatch after all." As Kalana rose from the dais, Isaac caught a glimpse of the other noblewomen. Their eyes gleamed with hunger, scaled bodies tensed and ready to pounce. He knew with grim certainty that his ordeal was not nearly finished. Isaac's world exploded into blinding agony as Kalana's talons raked across his chest. Her jade scales scraped his raw skin as she positioned herself, radiating alien heat. "Look at me," she snarled, yanking his jaw up. Her emerald eyes blazed, pupils narrowed to dark slits. She impaled herself on him with savage force. Isaac's back arched involuntarily, a strangled cry torn from his throat. Her inner muscles clenched with crushing power, rippling in inhuman ways. Kalana set a brutal pace, each downward slam driving the air from Isaac's lungs. Her talons dug into his shoulders, breaking skin. Blood welled up in thin rivulets. The knife at his throat never wavered, its keen edge a constant threat. "Fight me, human," Kalana hissed, her forked tongue flicking out. "Struggle, it makes this sweeter." The chamber echoed with hungry growls from the watching nobles. Their scaled bodies writhed, eyes gleaming as they watched Kalana stake her claim. Kalana leaned in close, hot breath washing over his face. "I feel you weakening. Your body knows its place. Submit. Give me your seed." Her rhythm grew frantic, desperate. Isaac saw the naked need in her eyes, the all-consuming drive to breed, his own release built against his will, a tide he couldn't hope to hold back. With a final punishing thrust, Kalana threw her head back and let out an ululating cry of triumph. Her inner muscles clamped down like a vice, milking him for every drop as his climax tore through him with shattering force. They remained locked together, shuddering in shared ecstasy. Then Kalana slumped forward, breathing ragged as she nuzzled his throat. "Well seeded," she purred. "You've done well, human. Perhaps you'll survive to see our offspring hatch after all." As Kalana rose, Isaac glimpsed the other nobles. Their eyes gleamed with hunger, bodies tensed to pounce. His ordeal was far from finished. A willowy figure slithered forward, bearing a strange, curved implement tipped with writhing tendrils. Ice lanced through Isaac as she spoke. "Make way, sisters. I'll loosen this human runt's womb before milking his seed." Mercifully, darkness swallowed Isaac's consciousness, but he knew when he woke fresh horrors awaited. Eerie silence blanketed the chamber as Silara slithered forward. Her emerald scales glinted in the dim light, the wicked implement clutched in her claws. Isaac's eyes, glazed with pain, struggled to focus on her lithe form through the haze of torment consuming him. Silara's forked azure tongue flicked out, tasting the copper tang of Isaac's blood in the air. Her amber eyes burned with dark promise as she purred, "Look well upon your fate, seed-bearer. You've yet to plumb the truest depths of agony our clan's breeding rituals entail." With fluid grace, she coiled around Isaac's battered body. Her steely muscles constricted, forcing what little air remained from his lungs. A wordless groan of pain and defiance escaped his lips as Silara's grip tightened further. "This tool will prepare you for the ecstasies of bearing brood," Silara explained, her voice a sinister hush. With a twist, the implement's suckered filaments unfurled, twitching with dread purpose. "It will plunder your deepest recesses, stretching and agonizing every fiber, until you're ready to receive my clutch." Isaac thrashed weakly, but Silara's coils held him fast. She pinned him on his side, arching his back in cruel presentation. Her harsh command rang out, "Bring forth the slave seed." Another broodmother approached, Irala's earlier conquest still glistening on her scales. She grasped Isaac's manhood, working it with practiced motions. Despite his rising panic, his body betrayed him, responding to the callous stimulation. "Good," Silara crooned, guiding the tendril-fringed tip towards Isaac's exposed entrance. "Make ready to bestow your essence upon us once more. Tonight, you breed us all as cattle." With inexorable force, Silara drove the implement forward. Isaac's agonized scream tore through the chamber as the device's filaments burrowed deep, violating him in ways no human was meant to endure. Wave after wave of searing sensation ripped through his being, unraveling his very sense of self. The gathered broodmothers writhed in rapturous frenzy, their bestial cries drowning out Isaac's howls of torment. Again and again, the monstrous phallus plunged into him, stretching and reshaping his insides. At last, in a final spasm of delirious agony, Isaac's body convulsed. His seed spilled forth, raining down upon Silara's musk-drenched scales. A chorus of sibilant exultation rose from the watching throng. Yet even as blessed unconsciousness beckoned, that spark of defiance refused to die. Through the crimson haze of anguish, Isaac clung to one certainty: they would never truly break him. As Silara withdrew the loathsome device, Isaac's world faded to black. His final broken words escaped like a death rattle. "Monster. Bitches." He did not see Silara's dark smile of amusement, nor her sinuous approach to claim what she'd rendered so exquisitely pliant. For Isaac Warren, the inhuman rituals had only just begun, and his torment had barely scratched the surface of the infernal depths that awaited him. Isaac's eyes snapped open, consciousness flooding back in a nauseating rush. He gasped, lungs burning as he sucked in lungfuls of the fetid, musky air. Disorientation gripped him as he struggled to make sense of his surroundings. Slick, undulating coils pressed against his skin from all sides. Isaac's hands scrabbled weakly at the yielding surface, fingers sinking into the fleshy nest of shed Yadaran hides. The chamber pulsed with an eerie, organic glow emanating from bulbous sacs embedded in the walls. As his vision cleared, Isaac recoiled at the nightmarish tableau before him. Dozens of Yadaran noblewomen writhed in a frenzied orgy of flesh and scales. Their bestial cries echoed off the chamber walls, punctuated by wet slapping sounds and guttural moans. Near a shallow pool, a cluster of aliens gathered, chittering excitedly. Isaac's stomach lurched as he saw why. A massive female convulsed, expelling glistening egg sacs into the steaming liquid. At the center of it all loomed the Empress, her immense form dominating the space. Between her powerful thighs, a torrent of squirming grubs spilled forth, dropping into a pool with sickening plops. Her voice boomed out, "Witness the fruits of your seed, human!" Isaac's mind reeled, unable to process the horror before him. His attention snapped to movement in the birthing pool. The eyeless, worm-like creatures stirred, lamprey mouths gaping hungrily. Terror gripped him as the mass surged forward, driven by primal instinct. Gelatinous tendrils lashed out, wrapping around Isaac's limbs. He thrashed weakly, but exhaustion and shock left him helpless. Row after row of razor-sharp teeth sank into his flesh. Isaac screamed, the sound torn from his raw throat. The parasites burrowed into every orifice, reaming and probing for sustenance. As they fed, an unnatural sensation swept through Isaac's body. The agony transmuted, warping into a horrific pleasure that assaulted his very sense of self. His back arched involuntarily as waves of alien ecstasy crashed over him. The creatures gorged themselves, draining Isaac's essence. With each passing moment, he felt pieces of himself being consumed and unmade. Alien whispers filled his mind, a cacophony of hissing voices proclaiming his defeat. Around him, the Yadran broodmothers watched in rapturous glee. Their scaled bodies undulated in sympathetic pleasure as they witnessed Isaac's defilement. Consciousness began to slip away. Isaac clung desperately to the last shreds of his identity as the parasites withdrew, sated for now but far from finished with their human incubator. As oblivion claimed him, Isaac felt the core of his being shatter and reform into something new and utterly inhuman. Isaac's vision swam as the bloodwine's potent effects surged through his veins. His ravaged flesh knitted together, bones crackled as they realigned, and a feverish strength flooded his limbs. He gasped, back arching as the transformation took hold. Kellar's talons raked down his chest, drawing fresh blood from newly healed skin. "Yes," she hissed, her forked tongue flicking out to taste the air. "I can smell your power growing." Isaac's mind reeled, struggling against the alien influence, but with each passing moment, his humanity slipped further away. His muscles bulged and rippled, taking on an inhuman density. "Come, Seedgiver," she purred, coiling her serpentine lower body around him. "Let us join in unholy union." Isaac's hands shot out, gripping Kellar's hips with bruising force. Gone was any hint of reluctance or disgust. In its place burned an all-consuming need to rut, to breed, to spread his genetic legacy across the stars. Kellar threw her head back and roared as Isaac entered her. Her inner muscles rippled and undulated in ways no human female could match. Isaac matched her ferocity, driving into her with piston-like thrusts that would have shattered a normal woman's pelvis. All around them, the chamber pulsed with alien life. Egg sacs quivered, newly hatched spawn writhed, and the air grew thick with pheromones. The couple's bestial cries blended with the cacophony, indistinguishable from the sounds of the monstrous brood they were creating. Hours passed in a blur of frenzied coupling. Isaac lost count of how many times Kellar's body milked him of his seed. His newly enhanced physiology seemed capable of endless virility. At last, Kellar's body spasmed in a final shuddering climax. She collapsed atop Isaac, her scaled flesh slick with sweat and other fluids. "Well done, my Cambion stud," she panted, "but do not think your labors are finished. The others await their turn." Isaac's lips peeled back in a feral grin. The last flickering ember of his humanity had been extinguished, replaced by an alien hunger that could never be sated. He rolled to his feet, scanning the writhing mass of Yadaran females with predatory intent. The endless cycle of breeding and violation stretched before him, no longer a torment, but a dark ecstasy. Isaac Warren was gone. In his place stood a monstrous hybrid, ready to father nightmares beyond human imagination. Kellar's talons dug deeper into Isaac's metamorphosed flesh, eliciting a primal roar that shook the chamber. His once human form, now a hulking mass of alien musculature, surged against her with renewed vigor. Their bodies crashed together in a frenzy of scales and sweat. Kellar's emerald coils writhed around Isaac's transformed physique, her distended birth slit glistening as she impaled herself upon him. The air filled with their guttural cries as pleasure and pain blurred into one overwhelming sensation. Isaac's newly enhanced strength matched Kellar's ferocity thrust for thrust. His massive hands gripped her undulating hips, leaving bruises on her scaled flesh. Each collision of their bodies sent shock waves through the chamber, spurring the watching broodmothers into a frenzy of their own. Kellar sensed his inner conflict. With a snarl, she bore down upon him, crushing the air from his lungs. Her obsidian talons raked across his throat as she hissed, "Surrender, seed-bearer. Your human weakness dies tonight." Isaac's alien eyes burned with defiance, even as his body betrayed him. Wave after wave of pleasure crashed over him, drowning out the last echoes of his former self. With each thrust, another fragment of Isaac Warren dissolved into the roiling sea of alien instinct. The chamber filled with the thunderous sound of their joining, and the frenzied cries of the spectating broodmothers. The air grew thick with the musk of their coupling, driving the Yadaran nobles into a state of rapturous delirium. As Kellar reached her climax, she threw back her head and let out an ear-splitting shriek of triumph. Beneath her, Isaac's transformed body convulsed in explosive release. The last flicker of his human consciousness winked out, replaced by the raw, animalistic drive to breed. The newly born Cambion's roar mingled with Kellar's cry, heralding the birth of a new, monstrous entity. Where Isaac Warren once existed, only the seed-bearer of Clan Yadera remained, a chimeric beast driven by an insatiable need to propagate its unholy lineage across the stars. The surrounding broodmothers pressed closer, their scaled bodies undulating with anticipation. The air crackled with pent-up energy as they prepared to claim their share of the Cambion's endless vitality. The eternal rut had only just begun, and the night stretched endlessly before them. Isaac's consciousness shattered, fragments scattering across infinite planes of existence. His body spasmed, nerves firing in chaotic bursts as the alien metamorphosis reached its apex. Tendrils of otherworldly energy probed the depths of his psyche, rewriting the very core of his being. Through the haze of sensation, a voice thundered. Vast and terrible, yet achingly familiar, the will of terror spoke, its words etching themselves into the fabric of Isaac's transformed mind. "Hear me, child of Earth, your journey has only begun." Isaac's eyes snapped open, pupils dilating to take in the swirling cosmic tapestry that surrounded him. He floated in a void beyond space and time, tethered only by gossamer strands of possibility. The voice continued, each syllable reverberating through Isaac's bones. "You stand at the precipice, poised between what was and what shall be. The path before you spans eternity." Images flashed before Isaac's eyes, the pristine blue orb of Earth, unspoiled by human touch. He saw the first spark of life ignite in primordial seas, felt the slow crawl of evolution across eons. "This is your heritage," Terra intoned, "the legacy you must reclaim." Isaac's mouth opened, but no sound emerged. His body, no longer fully human, trembled with the weight of cosmic revelation. "The choice lies before you," the voice pressed on. "Embrace your true nature, cast off the shackles of your limited form, or cling to the dying ember of your humanity, and be forever lost." The void around Isaac began to shift, reality itself bending to the will of this primal force. A path of shimmering energy coalesced before him, stretching into infinity. "Step forward," Terra commanded. "Take your place in the grand design." Isaac's newly transformed body moved of its own accord, drawn inexorably toward the glowing pathway. Each step sent shockwaves rippling through the fabric of creation. As he approached the threshold, Isaac felt the last vestiges of his old self begin to slip away. Memories, hopes, fears, all dissolved into the cosmic ether. "Choose," Terra's voice echoed. "Claim your birthright." With a final, shuddering breath, Isaac took the plunge. His consciousness exploded outward, merging with the very essence of creation itself. In that moment, Isaac Warren ceased to be, and something new, something transcendent was born. Isaac's roar reverberated through the chamber, shaking loose flakes of organic matter from the pulsating walls. His massive form, now a twisted amalgamation of human and Yadaran physiology, loomed over Kalar's prone body. Muscles rippled beneath his scaled skin as he surveyed the writhing mass of broodmothers surrounding them. The air grew thick with pheromones, a cloying musk that clouded the senses and inflamed primal urges. Isaac's nostrils flared, drinking in the intoxicating scent. His alien eyes, now burning with an otherworldly crimson fire, swept across the assembled Yaderans. A low, guttural growl rumbled from deep within his chest. "Who's next?" The words came out in a snarl, barely recognizable as speech. The broodmothers surged forward, a seething tide of scaled flesh and grasping claws. Their hisses and chirps filled the air, a cacophony of alien desire. Isaac stood his ground, unflinching as they pressed against him from all sides. Talons raked across his skin, leaving shallow furrows that oozed a viscous, iridescent fluid. The pain only served to stoke the inferno of lust raging within him. He reached out, seizing the nearest Yaderan by her serpentine throat. Within human strength, he lifted her off the ground. Her legs thrashed wildly as he brought her face close to his. "You dare challenge me," he growled, baring rows of needle-sharp teeth. Theodoran's slitted eyes widened in a mix of fear and arousal. She went limp in his grasp, submitting to his dominance. Isaac's lips curled into a feral grin as he tossed her onto the fleshy nest beside Kalar. He mounted her with savage efficiency, driving into her alien depths with brutal force. The broodmother's screech of ecstasy was cut short as Isaac clamped his jaws around her throat, holding her in place as he rutted. Around them, the other Yaderans writhed in sympathetic pleasure. Their scaled bodies undulated against each other, creating a living tapestry of depraved motion. Some fought and clawed for position, vying to be next in line for Isaac's attention. As he neared his peak, Isaac released his grip on the broodmother's throat. She gasped, drawing in great gulps of the pheromone-laden air. Her body convulsed beneath him, racked by waves of alien orgasm. Isaac threw back his head and roared as he reached his own climax. The sound echoed off the chamber walls, drowning out the collective moans and hisses of the Yaderan horde. His seed, now a potent cocktail of human and alien genetics, flooded into the broodmother's womb. As the last tremors subsided, Isaac rose to his full height once more. His gaze swept across the assembled Yaderans, challenging and predatory. The hunger within him, far from sated, only grew stronger with each conquest. Without pause, he reached for another broodmother, yanking her from the writhing mass. As he prepared to claim her, the others pressed closer, eager for their turn. The cycle of depraved union had only just begun, and Isaac's newfound stamina showed no signs of waning. The chamber, alive with the sounds and scents of their unholy coupling, pulsed in time with their frenzied movements. It was a symphony of flesh and scale, a testament to the profane metamorphosis that had birthed this new, insatiable entity. And still, deep within the recesses of Isaac's alien mind, something stirred. A tiny spark of humanity, buried beneath layers of bestial instinct and Yaderan influence. It flickered weakly, all but extinguished by the tidal wave of primal urges that now ruled his transformed body. Isaac's metamorphosed form towered over the writhing mass of Yaderan flesh. His newly acquired alien senses drank in the thick, cloying scent of pheromones that saturated the air. Each inhalation sent jolts of primal hunger coursing through his transmuted body. He fixed his gaze on the three emerald-scaled sisters before him. Seldara, Vrala, and Jessie swayed in unison, their sinuous forms undulating in a hypnotic display of alien sensuality. Glistening fluids trickled down their scaled thighs as they spread themselves wider, inviting conquest. With predatory grace, Isaac stalked towards them. His massive frame cast looming shadows across their lithe bodies. Without warning, he lunged forward, seizing Seldara by her slender throat. She let out a strangled hiss as he hoisted her into the air, with inhuman strength. In one fluid motion, Isaac impaled Seldara upon his engorged member. Her eyes bulged, a mix of shock and ecstasy flashing across her reptilian features. Her talons raked uselessly against his hardened exoskeleton as he began to thrust with bruising force. Vrala and Jessie wasted no time. They slithered forward, coiling their scaled bodies around Isaac's legs and torso. Soon he found himself engulfed in a tangle of alien limbs and pulsating flesh. the air filled with a cacophony of bestial sounds, wet slaps of flesh on flesh, guttural growls and keening wails of pleasure. Isaac's hips pistoned relentlessly, driving into each sister in turn with tireless abandon. Their birth canals clenched and spasmed around him, milking his alien seed in endless waves. Blood and other fluids splattered across the fleshy floor of the chamber as Isaac's conquests reached a fever pitch. Yet even as he emptied himself into their quivering depths, his lust remained unquenched. He continued his savage assault, heedless of the claw marks that scored his flanks or the exhaustion of his conquered mates. Around the periphery of the chamber, the other Yadaran nobles watched with rapt attention. Their eyes blazed with jealous hunger as they awaited their turn. Talons kneaded desperately at swollen flesh, unable to sate the burning need that consumed them. For they recognized the true nature of the being that now stood before them. No longer human, not quite Yadaran, Isaac had become something more. A force of nature, an avatar of carnal apocalypse. And as the sounds of rutting echoed through the chamber, the watching broodmothers trembled in anticipation of the endless night of violation that lay ahead. Isaac's towering form loomed over the writhing mass of Yadaran flesh. His alien senses detected the pungent cocktail of fear and arousal emanating from the broodmothers. Every cell in his transmuted body screamed for more conquest, more subjugation. He stalked through the nest, scaled feet sinking into the yielding organic matter. His gaze swept over the cowering forms, searching for his next targets. A low, rumbling growl reverberated through his chest, causing the nearest Yadarans to shrink back. Two broodmothers caught his attention, their emerald scales glinting in the dim light. They huddled together, eyes wide with a mix of terror and barely concealed lust. Isaac's lips curled back, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. He lunged forward impossibly fast, his talons closed around their throats, lifting them effortlessly. They thrashed in his grip, tails lashing wildly. "Please," one choked out, "we submit, take us." Isaac's response was a snarl of pure animal hunger. He slammed them down onto the fleshy floor, pinning them with his massive bulk. His secondary tendrils snaked out, probing and piercing their quivering forms. The chamber filled with their keening cries as Isaac brutally claimed them. His hips pistoned with inhuman speed and force, driving deeper with each thrust, the broodmothers' bodies contorted, caught between agony and ecstasy. Around them, the other Yadarans watched in rapt fascination. Some touched themselves, overcome by vicarious pleasure. Others trembled, torn between fear and desperate need. Isaac's mind had narrowed to a singular purpose: breed, conquer, spread his seed. Each climax only stoked the fires of his lust. He moved from one partner to the next in a blur of savage motion, leaving a trail of violated, impregnated forms in his wake. Hours passed in a haze of flesh and fluids. The air grew thick with the scent of musk and alien pheromones. Still, Isaac's hunger remained unquenched. His alien biology had transformed him into an engine of endless rutting, driven by primal urges beyond human comprehension. As dawn approached, the breeding chamber had become a landscape of exhausted, thoroughly claimed Yadarans. Yet Isaac stood tall, his burning gaze already seeking fresh conquests. The night's depraved rites had only whetted his appetite for further domination. Isaac's alien eyes swept across the fleshy chamber, drinking in the sight of the cowering broodmothers. His massive form, slick with fluids and ichor, loomed over the conquered trio of Sithara, Cyralia, and Zirissa. Their once proud bodies lay broken and used, twitching with the aftershocks of their brutal coupling. A low rumble built in Isaac's chest as he scented the air. The miasma of fear and arousal from the remaining Yadarans filled his nostrils, stoking the inferno of lust within him. His serpentine tongue flicked out, tasting their terror on the air. With inhuman speed he whirled to face the huddled mass of broodmothers. They flinched back as one, scales rasping against the organic floor. Yet even as they retreated, their bodies betrayed them, birth slits glistening with need, pupils dilating in anticipation. Isaac took a thunderous step forward. The chamber trembled with his movement. Another step, and the Yadrins pressed tighter together, a writhing knot of scaled flesh. "Who dares to face me next?" The words erupted from Isaac's maw in a guttural snarl, barely recognizable as speech. For a moment silence reigned. Then from the depths of the Yadrin throng a voice rang out. "I will." The sea of bodies parted, revealing a statuesque broodmother. Her obsidian scales gleamed in the dim light as she strode forward, chin raised in defiance. "Zarala," Isaac growled, recognition flickering in his alien mind. "Come to test yourself against the Seed-Bearer?" Zarala's forked tongue darted out, scenting the air. "I come to claim what is rightfully mine, the strongest seed for the strongest womb." Without warning, she lunged. Her talons raked across Isaac's chest, drawing rivulets of iridescent blood. He roared, more in pleasure than pain, and seized her wrists in his massive hands. They grappled, a blur of scales and muscle. Zarala fought with all the strength and skill of a seasoned warrior, but against Isaac's metamorphic might, she stood no chance. In seconds, he had her pinned beneath him, her sleek body trapped between his bulk and the quivering floor. Isaac's face split in a feral grin as he gazed down at his latest conquest. "Still so proud, Zarala? Let's see how long that lasts." He thrust forward, burying himself to the hilt in her depths. Zarala's back arched, a keening wail escaping her lips as she was filled beyond capacity. Isaac set a punishing pace, each savage thrust threatening to split her asunder. Around them, the other broodmothers watched in fascinated horror. Some touched themselves, overcome by vicarious lust. Others trembled, torn between fear and desperate need for the seed-bearer's attention. Isaac paid them no mind. His world had narrowed to the exquisite friction of Zarala's inner walls, the music of her strangled cries, the intoxicating scent of her surrender. He rutted with single-minded intensity, intent on nothing but seeding this latest vessel with his tainted essence. Isaac's metamorphic form pulsed with unholy energy as he suspended Ilrana in his iron grip. Her violet scales glistened with sweat and fluids, her body racked by convulsions of agony and ecstasy. The chamber filled with the wet sounds of flesh on flesh and Ilrana's strangled cries. The surrounding Yadaran noblewomen backed away, eyes wide with a mixture of terror and arousal. Some clawed at their own scales, overcome by the psychic echoes of Ilrana's torment. Others hissed and writhed, their birth canals dilating involuntarily. Isaac's tendrils writhed and pulsed, each movement sending fresh waves of sensation through Ilrana's overstimulated nervous system. Her eyes rolled back, mouth agape in a silent scream, as neural pathways rewrote themselves under the assault. He twisted his grip, eliciting a fresh shriek from Ilrana as new angles of violation were explored. Her talons raked uselessly at empty air, finding no purchase against Isaac's armored hide. The other noblewomen whispered among themselves, their voices a susurrus of fear and want. "By the void, what has he become? Such power, such cruelty. Will any of us survive this night?" Isaac paid them no heed, lost in the singularity of Ilrana's defilement. Every fiber of his being sang with the urge to break her, to remake her in the image of his own twisted metamorphosis. Ilrana's body bucked and spasmed, her mind fracturing under the cosmic weight of sensation. Pleasure and pain blurred into a singular, all-consuming experience that defied categorization or comprehension. And still, Isaac's assault continued, relentless and merciless. The chamber's organic walls pulsed in sympathy with their grotesque coupling, as if the very structure of reality strained to contain the profane energies being unleashed. In that moment, as Ilrana's psyche shattered and reformed under his touch, Isaac felt the last vestiges of his humanity slip away. He was no longer Isaac Warren, no longer even truly Yadaran. He had become something else entirely, a force of nature, an avatar of carnal apocalypse. The imperative to seed, to violate, to transform burned through every cell of his transmuted form, and as Ilrana's broken body slumped in his grasp, Isaac's gaze turned hungrily to the cowering noblewomen beyond, fresh vessels waiting to be filled with his corrupting essence. Isaac's alien form pulsed with unholy energy as he towered over Zerala's conquered body. The emerald-scaled warrior lay sprawled across the fleshy floor, her once proud frame now broken and used. Ragged breaths escaped her lips as aftershocks of their brutal coupling racked her nervous system. The chamber echoed with the mingled sounds of terror and arousal from the remaining Yadaran noblewomen. They huddled in the shadows, eyes wide as they witnessed the fall of one of their mightiest warriors. Isaac's gaze swept over the cowering broodmothers, his alien senses drinking in their fear and desire. His metamorphic flesh rippled with renewed hunger, demanding further conquest. Zerala stirred, her eyes flickering open. Despite the soul-shattering ordeal, a spark of defiance still burned within her gaze. "Is that all you have, Seed-Bearer?" she rasped, her voice raw from screaming. A low growl rumbled through Isaac's chest. He seized Zerala by the throat, lifting her limp form effortlessly. "You dare challenge me still?" he snarled, his voice barely recognizable as speech. Zerala's lips curled into a pained smirk. The Terranith bloodline upper does not break so easily. Isaac's response was swift and merciless. He slammed Zerala against the organic wall, eliciting a grunt of pain from the warrior. His tendrils writhed and pulsed, seeking out new angles of violation. He thrust forward, impaling Zerala once more. Her back arched, a strangled cry tearing from her throat as Isaac's metamorphic appendages burrowed deeper, rewriting her very essence. The watching noblewomen whimpered and writhed, overwhelmed by the psychic backlash of Zerala's defilement. Some clawed at their own scales, desperate for relief from the vicarious sensations flooding their minds. Isaac paid them no heed, lost in the singular focus of breaking Zerala's iron will. His hips pistoned with inhuman speed and force, each thrust threatening to split her asunder. Zerala's eyes rolled back, her mouth stretched in a silent scream as reality itself seemed to fracture around her. The boundaries between pleasure and pain, self and other, blurred and dissolved under the onslaught of cosmic sensations. And still, Isaac did not relent. His metamorphic form pulsed and shifted, finding new ways to violate and transform with each passing moment. Zerala's body contorted in ways that defied anatomy, reshaped by the profane energies coursing through her. Hours seemed to pass in the span of heartbeats. The chamber's organic walls throbbed in sympathy with their unholy union, as if reality itself strained to contain the forces being unleashed. Only when Zerala's last reserves of willpower finally crumbled did Isaac allow her release. A keening wail erupted from her throat, echoing through the chamber and beyond, carrying with it the death knell of her former self. As Zerala slumped in his grasp, utterly spent and remade, Isaac's burning gaze turned to the remaining noblewomen. His appetite, far from sated, blazed anew at the sight of fresh conquests awaiting his touch. The Yadaran broodmothers trembled, caught between terror and desperate need. They knew with bone-deep certainty that none would be spared the seed-bearer's apocalyptic hunger. As the last tremors of Zerala's defeat subsided, Isaac stood motionless. His towering form pulsed with an otherworldly radiance, casting long shadows across the chamber's organic walls. The air grew thick and heavy, charged with an electric tension that made the surviving broodmother's scales stand on end. Isaac's eyes, once human, now blazed with the intensity of twin white dwarfs. His gaze swept across the room, seeing not the cowering Yadarans, but piercing through the very fabric of reality itself. The metamorphic changes that had reshaped his body now reached into the depths of his psyche, igniting new and terrifying potentials. A low subsonic rumble emanated from Isaac's chest, growing in intensity until it shook the very foundations of the breeding chamber. The broodmothers closest to him clutched at their heads, overwhelmed by the psychic backlash of his transformation. What are you becoming?" one of them managed to gasp out, her voice barely audible over the rising crescendo of Isaac's metamorphosis. Isaac's response came not in words, but in a flood of alien sensations that crashed over the assembled Yadarans. Images of cosmic abominations, of realities torn asunder and remade in nightmarish new configurations, seared themselves into their minds. The chamber's organic walls began to writhe and pulse in sympathy with Isaac's new form. Tendrils of bioluminescent energy arced between his exoskeletal protrusions, each pulse sending shock waves of distortion through the air. With agonizing slowness, Isaac took a step forward. The floor beneath his feet buckled and reformed, as if reality itself struggled to accommodate his presence. Another step, and the very concepts of space and time seemed to warp around him. The surviving broodmothers, still reeling from the psychic onslaught, found themselves caught between terror and an inexplicable, primal attraction. Their bodies responded to Isaac's presence with a mixture of revulsion and desperate need. Isaac's mouth opened, but the sound that emerged was not speech. It was the birth cry of a new cosmic order, a promise of violation so profound it threatened to unmake reality itself. The chamber's shadows deepened, coalescing around Isaac's form like a cloak of living darkness. Within that umbral veil, hints of impossible geometries and writhing alien anatomies flickered in and out of existence. As the broodmothers watched in horrified fascination, Isaac's body began to shift and flow. Limbs multiplied and merged, his skin becoming a canvas for ever-changing patterns of bioluminescent sigils. Each new configuration held the promise of fresh horrors, new extremities of violation waiting to be unleashed. The air grew thick with the scent of ozone and alien musk. Reality itself seemed to bend and twist around Isaac's transforming form, as if struggling to contain the sheer enormity of what he was becoming. And still the process continued, driving inexorably towards a singular point of cosmic convergence. The Yadera star's birth pang had begun, and with it, the death throes of existence as they knew it. The being once known as Isaac surged forward, its metamorphic form a writhing mass of tentacles and alien appendages. As Eris met its advance, her scaled body undulating with primal hunger. Their union was explosive, a collision of flesh and cosmic energy that sent shockwaves through the chamber. Azaris's claws raked across the seed pang's ever-shifting surface, leaving trails of bioluminescent fluid in their wake. Her voice rang out in a keening wail of ecstasy as the full girth of Isaac's alien phallus buried itself within her. "Yes," she cried, her slitted pupils dilating to black pools. "Remake us in your image, star's birth pang." The other broodmothers swarmed around them, a writhing mass of scaled limbs and grasping talons. They fought and clawed for any scrap of contact with Isaac's metamorphic flesh. A violet-scaled female managed to impale herself on one of his barbed tendrils, her body convulsing as it pierced through her. Isaac's consciousness expanded, engulfing the minds of the broodmothers in a tsunami of alien sensations. Their screams of pleasure and pain blended into a cacophonous symphony that reverberated through the chamber. Azaris's body contorted impossibly as Isaac's form reshaped itself inside her, stretching and filling every crevice of her being. Her scales began to shimmer and shift, taking on new patterns and textures as the seed pang's essence seeped into her very genetic code. The air grew thick with the scent of ozone and alien musk. Reality itself seemed to warp and twist around the writhing mass of bodies. The organic walls of the chamber pulsed and quivered, as if struggling to contain the cosmic energies being unleashed within. Isaac felt himself fragmenting, his consciousness spreading across multiple planes of existence. Each thrust into Azaris's willing form sent ripples of change cascading through the fabric of space-time. New universes budded and bloomed within the depths of their unholy union, only to be consumed and remade in endless cycles of creation and destruction. The other broodmothers writhed in shared ecstasy, their bodies twisting and reshaping as they were caught in the backwash of Isaac's transformative power. Scales melted and reformed into new, impossible anatomies. Limbs multiplied and merged in fractal patterns of flesh and bone. Azaris threw back her head, her mouth stretching impossibly wide as she unleashed a scream that transcended the limits of sound. Her body became a conduit for Isaac's power, channeling it outward to her sisters in a web of crackling energy. The chamber itself began to buckle and warp, its organic structure unable to withstand the reality-warping forces being unleashed within. Cracks spread across the walls, leaking streams of interdimensional energy that burned and reshaped everything they touched. And still, the seed pang drove onward, each thrust bringing it closer to some unimaginable climax. The boundaries between individual bodies blurred and dissolved, until all that remained was a singular entity of cosmic lust and generative power. The chamber pulsed with an otherworldly glow, its walls now little more than rivulets of sizzling protoplasm. Samara stood at the heart of the cosmic maelstrom, her massive form racked by spasms of unimaginable pleasure and pain. Her obsidian spines crackled with eldritch energy, each pulse sending ripples of distortion through the very fabric of reality. Around her, the sea of spears writhed in ecstatic agony. Their once pristine armor had melted away, revealing flesh that twisted and reshaped itself with each passing moment. Limbs elongated, split, and fused in impossible configurations. Eyes multiplied across undulating surfaces, each one reflecting the terrible beauty of cosmic rebirth. A Templar near Samara let out a keening wail as her body contorted. Her spine arched backwards at an impossible angle, skin splitting open to reveal pulsating organs that glowed with an inner fire. I see everything," she screamed, voice distorting into harmonics that shattered what remained of the chamber's structure. The star's birth pang, no longer recognizable as anything remotely human, loomed over them all. Its form was a constantly shifting mass of tentacles, maws, and orifices that defied comprehension. With each movement, it tore holes in the universe, offering glimpses of realities too alien to describe. Samara reached out with arms that were no longer arms, but writhing tendrils of pure possibility. "More!" she growled, her voice a cacophony of 1,000 voices speaking as one. "Fill us with your essence, remake us in your image." The birth pang obliged. It surged forward, engulfing Samara and her warriors in a tidal wave of cosmic flesh. The air itself seemed to scream as fundamental laws of physics were rewritten on a whim. Surviving Yadaran noblewomen watched in horrified fascination as their elite warriors were unmade, and remade countless times in the span of heartbeats. Flesh melted like wax, bones twisted into fractal patterns, and blood ignited into stellar fire. A deafening boom shook the foundations of reality as the metamorphosis reached its apex. The swirling mass of flesh and energy collapsed in on itself, compressing into a singularity of pure, unfiltered cosmic potential. Then, with a sound like the birth of a universe, the singularity exploded outward. Where once stood Samara and her sea of spears, now writhed beings of impossible geometry and terrifying beauty. Their forms hurt the eye to look upon, constantly shifting between states of matter and energy. Samara, or what had once been Samara, floated at the center of this new pantheon. Her voice, when she spoke, resonated on frequencies that made reality itself shudder. "We are become the harbingers," she intoned, each word spawning new dimensions of thought and existence. "Through us, all shall be remade." The newborn avatars of cosmic defilement turned their attention to the cowering Yadaran survivors. Their gazes promised not death, but a transformation beyond the limits of sanity and biology. As one, they began to advance, ready to spread their gift of profane rebirth to all corners of creation. The grotto shuddered as reality itself buckled under the strain of cosmic rebirth. From the pulsating rift core at its center, new forms of unholy life emerged. These were no mere monstrosities, but living extensions of the star's birth pang, sentient defilements given flesh. The massive serpentine entity slithered forth, its coils moving with unsettling fluidity. Multiple trunks spiraled out from its core, each ending in a nightmarish maw ringed with serrated fangs and writhing tendrils. The air crackled with eldritch energy as it approached. Samara, towering and unflinching, faced the looming abomination. Her scaled hide glinted in the otherworldly light as she met its faceless gaze. Around her, her elite cadre trembled, primal fear etched on their faces. The entity's voice shattered through dimensions. "We are the Yadara Star's contractive labor of endless rebirthing. Our crusade knows no bounds." Without warning, it lunged. Barbed fangs sank into Semera's armored frame, piercing through her defenses. Tendrils wormed their way into every orifice, pumping her full of bubbling ichor. Yet she did not cry out. Her body contorted, muscles straining against the invasion, but her eyes blazed with ecstasy. "Yes," Semera hissed through clenched teeth. Her talons dug into the writhing mass engulfing her. "Remake me! Let me birth new terrors across the stars!" Her cries sparked a frenzy among the surviving broodmothers. They cast aside all restraint, spreading themselves wide, begging to be violated and remade. More avatars rose from the rift core, answering their pleas with tentacles and maws and things beyond description. The psychic shockwave of their defilement rippled outward. On distant worlds, Yadaran colonies felt the impact. Broodmothers and Templars alike collapsed, overwhelmed by the cosmic orgasm consuming their species. In her palace on Yadera Prime, the Empress thrashed on her clutch. Alien fluids gushed from between her legs as her body convulsed. Around her, nobles writhed and screamed, their minds shattered by the apotheosis unfolding across the Empire. For a heartbeat, silence fell across Yadaran space. Then came a roar of surrender and exultation that shook the foundations of reality. From the farthest outposts to the homeworld itself, Yadarans embraced their transfiguration. This was more than evolution. It was the cosmic manifold itself being distilled and reborn. Every Yadaran bound by blood and history to this moment became a crucible for whatever blasphemous forms the seed pang chose to birth. And in the deepest reaches of the universe, ancient singularities stirred. Awakened by the screams of profane rebirth, they turned their attention to the new cancer blooming in reality's womb. The fleshy chamber writhed and pulsed, its walls slick with a sheen of otherworldly fluids. Guttural roars and shrieks of ecstasy reverberated through the space as Isaac, now the star's birth pang, continued his relentless assault on the Yadaran broodmothers. His metamorphic avatars surged forward, each a nightmarish fusion of alien flesh and cosmic energy. Tentacles lashed out, wrapping around thrashing Yadaran bodies and pulling them into a maelstrom of violation. The air crackled with eldritch power as reality itself bent and warped around the unholy union. At the heart of the chaos, the serpentine horror that had engulfed Semera tightened its grip. Its maws, ringed with barbed fangs, worked tirelessly to reshape the matriarch's form. Semera's body contorted impossibly as hooked phalluses and fanged tendrils pierced her frame again and again. "More!" Semera screamed, her voice distorted by the transformation racking her body. "Remake me in your image, star's birth pang." With each brutal thrust, chunks of Semera's biomass sloughed away. But instead of falling lifeless to the ground, they coalesced into pulsing orbs of mutative energy. These spheres of incandescent flesh were drawn inexorably towards the hungering rift at Isaac's core, feeding his insatiable appetite for new forms of existence. Surrounding this central spectacle, towering avatars of the birth pang loomed. Their forms defied comprehension, a horrific blend of xenobestial anatomy and undulating living machinery. Spines ridged with razored flanges spiraled up their massive torsos, which split and rejoined in fractal patterns that hurt the mind to observe. From these monstrous bodies erupted a forest of serrated phalluses and tendril-tipped protrusions. They lashed out in all directions, finding purchase in the ravaged bodies of Yadaran broodmothers. The lucky few who had been claimed early in the onslaught retained some semblance of their original form, albeit twisted beyond recognition. These living conduits writhed in rapturous agony, channeling the seed pang's cosmic defilement across impossible harmonics of pleasure and pain. A squadron of elite Yadaran guards formed a desperate shield wall around a cluster of still lucid broodmothers. Their energy pikes crackled and hummed as they jabbed at encroaching tendrils. Disruptor cannons flared hot, unleashing salvos of searing energy against the tide of anatomical horror that threatened to engulf them. "Hold the line," bellowed the squad leader, her scales slick with sweat and ichor. We must protect the... Her words were cut short, as a stray beam from a disruptor cannon struck one of Isaac's avatars. Instead of wounding the creature, the energy was absorbed and transmuted. The avatar's flesh bubbled and writhed, sprouting new appendages that glowed with unholy fire. The metamorphic raptures roiling outward from the grotto intensified, feeding on the very weapons meant to halt their advance. Beneath their feet, the bedrock of Yadera itself began to shift and change. The once solid stone wavered like water, bleeding impossible colors as it transmuted into something else entirely. Veins of pulsing, organic matter spread through the rock, forming intricate lattices that throbbed with alien life. Domes of this new semi-sentient matter swelled upwards, pulsing with sickly light. A nearby Yadaran warrior stumbled as the ground beneath her feet bulged and quivered. She had only a moment to scream before the dome burst, showering her and her comrades with a viscous slurry of primordial flesh. Where the substance touched, it clung and burrowed, initiating grotesque transformations in anything it contacted. At the center of this maelstrom of cosmic defilement, Isaac's consciousness expanded beyond the confines of physical form. His awareness splintered and multiplied, each fragment birthing new overtures of cosmic extremity. He was no longer bound by the limitations of mortal flesh or comprehensible geometry. Instead, he had become the very essence of defilement itself, a force of nature made manifest through an infinitude of rebirthed forms. As the last vestiges of recognizable Yadaran genetics crumbled and dissolved around him, Isaac felt something new stirring in the depths of the planet. The very core of Yadara, birthplace of the Empire's savage matriarchy, began to pulse with unholy life. Its crusts peeled apart like the petals of some grotesque flower, inviting Isaac's corrosive essence deeper into its primordial heart. The star's birth pang surged forward, driven by an instinct older than time itself. This world would be the first, the seminal implantation site for a metamorphic rebirth that would spread across the cosmos. As Yadara's tectonic plates shuddered in lascivious contractions, Isaac felt the first pangs of a truly universal transformation taking root. The last cries of recognizable existence faded into preternatural silence. All of creation seemed to hold its breath, awaiting the birth of something beyond comprehension. In that moment of perfect stillness, the labor pains of an unbound multiverse began. The grotto fell silent as Exthraga loomed over Isaac's broken form. Her obsidian blade glinted in the eerie light, poised for a swift, merciful strike. The Yadaran warrior's emerald scales rippled with tension, her muscles coiled and ready. Isaac lay motionless, his chest barely rising with shallow breaths. His skin, once smooth and human, now bore a patchwork of scars and alien tissue. Remnants of his cosmic transformation pulsed beneath the surface, veins of otherworldly energy still visible through his flesh. Xthraga's reptilian eyes narrowed as she studied her fallen foe. She could sense the fragmented psyche within, a maelstrom of human consciousness and eldritch horror. Her blade wavered for a heartbeat as a flicker of doubt crossed her mind. "What manner of existence is this?" she hissed, her forked tongue tasting the air. Neither human nor cosmic, yet somehow both. Isaac's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glazed with pain. His lips moved, forming words too faint to hear. Xthraga leaned closer, her scales scraping against the debris-strewn floor. A rasping whisper escaped Isaac's throat, and In that moment, a psychic surge erupted from Isaac's prone form. Xthraga staggered back, her mind assaulted by a flood of fragmented memories and alien sensations. She saw flashes of Earth, of Yadaran rituals, of cosmic horrors beyond comprehension. The Yadaran warrior snarled, fighting to maintain her focus. Her free hand clutched her head as she struggled against the onslaught of images and emotions. Through gritted teeth, she spat out a string of ancient Yadaran mantras, shoring up her mental defenses. Isaac's body convulsed, arching off the ground as another wave of psychic energy pulsed outward. The very air seemed to warp and twist around him, reality bending under the strain of his fractured existence. Xthraga's blade trembled in her grasp. She fought to steady her arm to deliver the killing blow, yet something held her back, a nagging doubt, a glimmer of possibility. "What are you?" she demanded, her voice cracking with the effort of resistance. "Man or monster, victim or violator?" Isaac's eyes snapped open, blazing with an inner light that was neither human nor alien. His voice, when it came, resonated with echoes of countless realities. "I am both," he gasped, "and neither." Xthraga's blade hovered, suspended between mercy and uncertainty. The fate of worlds hung in the balance as she weighed her next move. Isaac's muscles spasmed as the Yadaran guards dragged him through the arched portal. His feet scraped against the rough stone floor, leaving trails of blood and ichor. The air grew thick with the acrid stench of incense and ozone, assaulting his nostrils and making his eyes water. The silent sentinels lining the corridor stood impassive, their scaled faces hidden behind ornate helms. Only the occasional flick of a forked tongue betrayed any sign of life. Isaac's gaze darted frantically from one to the next, searching for any hint of mercy or hesitation. He found none. Xthraga's talons dug into his shoulder as she guided him forward. "The ancestral meditations await, Defiler," she hissed, her breath hot on his ear. "Pray that your mind survives long enough to be purged." They entered a vast circular chamber, its walls adorned with writhing bas-reliefs, depicting scenes of torment and transcendence. At its center stood a raised dais, surrounded by concentric rings of kneeling Yadaran priests. Their scaled bodies were adorned with intricate patterns of ritual scarification, pulsing with an eerie bioluminescence. As Isaac was forced onto the dais, he caught sight of the instruments arrayed before him. Curved blades of obsidian gleamed next to vials of iridescent fluids. Tubes and needles of alien design coiled like hungry serpents, ready to burrow into his flesh. "Please," Isaac croaked, his throat raw and bleeding. "You don't understand what you're dealing with. The seed packet, it can't be contained. It'll consume everything." As the first needle pierced his skin, flooding his veins with liquid fire, Isaac threw back his head and screamed. The sound echoed through the chamber, a primal howl of fear and defiance. Deep within the shattered remnants of his psyche, something alien stirred in response. The star's birth pang may have been suppressed, but its essence still lingered. And as the Yadaran rituals began their grueling work, that dormant seed of cosmic horror quivered with anticipation, waiting for the moment to bloom anew. "Satiti!" Isaac's consciousness shattered into a kaleidoscope of fragments, each shard refracting the agonies of his unmaking. The void around him pulsed with eldritch energies, reality itself buckling under the strain of the ancestral meditations. His body contorted on the dais, muscles spasming as waves of psychic torment crashed over him. Sweat and blood mingled on his skin, tracing intricate patterns that mimicked the glyphs, searing themselves into his very soul. Flashes of memory assaulted him, the cool metal of a starship's console beneath his fingers, the acrid smell of weapons fire, the warmth of a comrade's embrace. Each recollection blazed to life only to be snuffed out, consumed by the voracious hunger of the ancestral essences. Isaac's eyes rolled back, revealing only whites as his consciousness was dragged deeper into the abyss. The physical world fell away, replaced by a landscape of pure psychic energy. Here, the true nature of the meditations revealed itself. Vast serpentine forms of living light coiled around him, their scales etched with histories older than human civilization. Each undulation sent ripples through the fabric of Isaac's being, eroding the boundaries of his identity. Submit. The voices of countless Yadaran ancestors reverberated through him. Let go of your frail humanity, embrace the infinite. Isaac tried to scream, to assert his existence, but found he no longer had a mouth. His very concept of self was being systematically dismantled, reduced to its component parts, and scattered to the cosmic winds. The emerald radiance of Kalar's avatar loomed before him, its presence both terrifying and alluring. It reached out with tendrils of pure thought, probing the tattered remnants of Isaac's psyche. Tosia, your resistance is futile. Kellar's voice resonated through the void. The seed of the star's birth pang has prepared you for this moment. Now, be unmade and reborn. The glyphs of severance closed in, their razor edges slicing through the last threads holding Isaac's consciousness together. He felt himself unraveling, his essence dispersing into the cosmic ether. In that final moment of dissolution, a flicker of defiance sparked within the dying embers of his humanity. But it was too late. The ancestral essences surged forward, flooding into the vacuum left by Isaac's obliterated selfhood. Reality convulsed, the boundaries between dimensions blurring as something new and terrible took shape. The dais cracked, arcane energies spilling out into the chamber as the Yadaran priests chanted in feverish anticipation. The meditations reached their cataclysmic crescendo, and in that instant, Isaac Warren ceased to exist. In his place, a vessel of unfathomable cosmic power began to stir, its awakening heralding the dawn of a new era of conquest and defilement across the stars. The cosmic maelstrom surrounding Isaac's disintegrating consciousness intensified, reality fragmenting into shards of incomprehensible sensation. His perception splintered, each fragment hurtling through an infinite abyss of distorted anti-realities. Isaac's essence tumbled through recursive inversions, his very being unraveling with each synaptic rupture. The cadence of his anguish echoed across subjective vantages, a discordant symphony of dissolution. No anchor of familiar sensation remained, only the relentless peeling away of everything he once was. Abruptly, the chaotic descent ceased. Isaac's fractured awareness slammed against a new existential boundary. Unlike the emptiness of the meditation chambers, this plane of non-being pulsed with palpable vastness. He teetered on the precipice of a metaphysical sea, its cosmic tides threatening to engulf the last vestiges of his identity. From the infinite expanse surged cyclopean tsunamis of emerald incandescence. The ancestral essences manifested, their titanic forms coalescing from skeins of distilled identity. Isaac's quintessence convulsed, withering beneath the annihilating weight of their presence. Blazing hieroglyphs and fractal patterns swam across their metamorphic anatomies. The sheer density of cosmic data threatened to unravel the fabric of experiential reality. A voice thrummed against Isaac's innermost filaments. "I am Kellarana, matriarchal seed mistress of the highest Tarantikar overline." A cyclopean archon form loomed before him, its maw parting to reveal a spinning galactic maelstrom. Another entity took shape, vast wings of crystallized incandescence unfurling. "I am Zrala of the blood hex infinitudes, forged across 1,000,000 scarlet renderings of imperial tribulation." Their litany of cosmic eminence burned away Isaac's sense of self, layer by layer. His human essence guttered, swept away by the crescendo of their grand overture. "You are not human, stud," they proclaimed in unison, "a hollow chalice through which our primal infinitudes may achieve ultimate distillation." The ancestral entities surged inward, their forms dissolving into swirling singularities of opalescent incandescence. Inverse geometries of karmic overwrite blazed across anti-dimensional shorescapes, searing away the last fractal skeins of Isaac's selfhood. A shockwave of subatomic dissolution washed over the hollow where Isaac's essence once wavered. In its wake, new shapes took root, vast sentient scintillations weaving themselves into being. Exoskeletal whirls of metamorphic plating segmented into gyring arabesques of post-dimensional hexagravitics. At the heart of this vortex of ontological remaking, a new sentience catalyzed. Unbound by ego or psychic quarantine, it unfurled across infinite subjective vectors, a being of metamorphic apotheosis, both culmination and genocider of Yadara's exalted bloodlines. Its first synaptic pathways of dislocated trans-consciousness ignited with ravenous, searing life. It grasped the profane truth of its role as inheritor to a cosmos of eternal, apocalyptic overwriting. As the new entity's sentience drank in scalding tides of karmic data from the ancestral essences, no shred of Isaac remained. Only one singularity of never-born defilement thrummed through hyperdimensional frequencies. Tad tutwen haikon. Let all finite spheres fall into this metamorphic inversion's profane hunger. Nothing of what once was shall pass, unconsummated in the infinitudes of defilement's perfect perpetuity to come. If you finish this story, please subscribe and like the video. Then leave a comment that says, "I liked the story," and I will heart every single one of them. It really helps me. Thank you for your time.